practical thing, and revenge against people you don't like.
Sure.
And then there's something called preemptive denunciation. You denounce people before you get denounced.
Right.
And that you denouncing somebody means you must not be a witch if you're denouncing them. And then you get this kind of competitive denunciation. No, you're a witch. No, you're a witch.
Right, right,
Much like the communist show trials, right? You got to denounce your neighbors as communists before they denounce you, or as non-communists, they denounce you, right? And
so that's the fear during mass hysteria, that people are going to turn on each other because they're afraid that someone's going to come after them, so they come after you first.
Right. I think we're going through that a little bit with cancel culture.
Sure, for sure, yeah.
I'm going to, get somebody on my campus and they used the wrong pronoun or the wrong adjective, and I'm going to denounce them before I get denounced and make the mistake.
Right. I will be the social justice warrior, so you couldn't possibly think that I had done anything wrong.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you get this thing called pluralistic ignorance, or the spiral of silence, where everybody thinks everybody else is thinking something when, in fact, nobody's actually thinking that. The classic experiment on this was binge drinking on college campuses. So you ask individual students by themselves, how do you feel about this? I don't really like it, but I know everybody else likes it. So everybody thinks that everybody else likes binge drinking, but actually individually they really don't like it. But I got to do it because everybody else is doing it, right? So this, in part, explains the kind of sustaining of the Nazi regime. Initially Hitler was popular because he stopped the Depression and got the economy going again and so on. And then he starts escalating, and everybody thinks, well, I'm not too happy about this policy and the thing with the Jews, I don't know. But everybody else seems to be going along with it. And then by the time you get to the point where somebody needs to speak up and say, this is wrong, they have concentration camps for those people. And they did it in a way that you could see your neighbor being hauled out and think, I'm keeping my mouth shut. I'm not saying anything.
Right.
So this is what's called a common knowledge problem. If I know that you know that I know something, then together we can kind of both stand up and say, we're putting a stop to this, right? It's like the Leah Thomas thing with the swimming thing. None of the women competitive swimmers thought this was fair. Right? It's a guy competing against us, not right. But any one of them by themselves that speaks out, they may just get kicked off the team or they get punished by their peers or whatever. It would really take, how do we reverse this trend we're in? It would take all of them together saying, we're not going to compete, all of us, if that person comes in here.
Right.
And that's the only way it was. So that's a common knowledge problem. We all have to know that we know about this to put a stop to that. So
that's an interesting modern example of that, right? Because that is the case with when you see someone who's a biological male who competes against biological females and dominates them. When they were, as a biological male, not doing nearly as well, there's clearly something wrong here. And yet these women are called transphobes, and they're ostracized, and some of them are kicked off teams, and it's a horrible situation. It's very similar to that.
Have you seen this video? This came out of a male to female trans playing competitive volleyball, and he goes up for the spike and just boom, and it hits this girl in the face, and she's down and out, concussion, and it's like, okay, I support trans rights. I don't think people should be discriminated against for whoever they want to identify as or whatever, but there's conflicting rights. What about women's rights?
Yeah.
And my favorite quote from Thomas Sowell, there are no perfect solutions. There's just compromises. Yes, trans rights, but women's rights, women's bathrooms, but the guy wants to go, no, you can't, no. You just can't have everything, right?
Right, you can't have everything, because also you're going to have people that take advantage of the current cultural climate that might be sexual predators.
There are examples of that.
Yes.
It's not a hysteric thing that's happening everywhere, but it has happened.
Right. But then there are people that are legitimately trans, and they probably should be able to use the woman's restroom. So how do you, what is the compromise
Well,
there?
Unisex bathrooms, I guess, have choices.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not that worried about the bathroom thing.
No, I'm not, but it's a weird one.
The sports thing bothers me because I've been an athlete my whole life, and it's obvious why we have women's divisions in sports. It just couldn't be more clear. We just celebrated Serena Williams' career. She'd had no career if there was no women's tennis division. Right. And it's like that for most sports. Although I'm always curious why there are women's divisions in chess. For example, I really don't know why that is the case.
That's the case with pool as well. There's a trans woman who is become a world champion in certain billiards games. and people are confused about that. That's a weird one, in my opinion, because it's not a power-based game.
Right.
But there's something about testosterone and the understanding of 3D space that there's some sort of an advantage. It was very weird. Pool is a weird one. It's because it's a game that I'm obsessed with, and I've always wondered. There's only been like a few women who have been very competitive and been able to beat men consistently in competition. And a lot of them are lesbians. I don't know what that's all about. But there's...
well, they have more masculine physiology. That's why. So it's an on average, just think of two overlapping bell curves. Of course, there are some women that can beat some men.
Sure.
That's not what we're talking about.
But we're talking about the best of the best.
Right. Once you get up to the 6 standard deviations out, you're 0.01% top performer.
Right.
1% is a huge difference at that level.
Gigantic.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's curious. The chess thing is also very curious. That was what was fascinating about the Queen's Gambit film. The Netflix thing.
Right.
This woman is just dominating all these men. She has this superior chess mind. But in reality, that doesn't really exist very often.
Right.
And it's weird. Like, why not?
Yeah, yeah. Well, you've always made the point if an MMA fight, if it was a trans woman that killed a woman, that'd probably end it. Probably lawsuits would end it.
Yeah, well, I'm for people being able to do that if they want to do that. Mm-hmm. If it's a woman who's a biological woman who chooses to compete against a trans woman. And one of the examples that I've used is there's a woman named Germaine Durandamy who's a multiple-time world Muay Thai champion. She was a UFC champion. And she actually had a boxing match with a man and knocked him out, a biological man. But she's extraordinary. She is the 1% of 1% in terms of elite female combat sports athletes.
Right.
And so I'm in favor of her being able to make that decision to compete against a man. But to force a biological woman to compete against a trans woman in MMA, I think is criminal.
Yeah.
I think that is crazy. And to pretend that they're the same thing is crazy. That doesn't make any sense to me.
If there was enough, you could have their own division.
Yes.
That would solve it.
That would solve it. And that's really that I think is the solution. That to me is the only compromise. And is there enough? I don't know. Maybe if you made a division like that. Look, for the longest time, they thought there weren't enough women to compete in combat sports to justify a UFC's women's division. But now the women's division of MMA is some of the most competitive and exciting.
Really?
Oh my God, yeah. There's a strawweight division, a flyweight division. There's a featherweight division, a bantamweight division. There's multiple divisions that are filled with elite female combat sports athletes, and some of those fights are fantastic.